Twice, the man who wrote one of the most controversial novels of the 20th century tried to destroy it himself. Not metaphorically, literally. He carried the manuscript out to a metal trash incinerator in his backyard, and he was ready to burn it. And the only reason it still exists today is that his wife physically stopped him and pulled the pages back out of the fire. That writer was Vladimir Nabokov. That book was Lolita. And the story of how it almost never reached a single reader is stranger and more revealing than most people realize. This isn't really a story about a scandalous novel. It's a story about a writer who nearly destroyed his own most important work out of fear, and the one person who refused to let him. By the early 1950s, Vladimir Nabokov was a respected but not especially famous writer. He had fled Russia after the revolution, lived years in Berlin and Paris, and eventually settled in the United States, where he taught literature at Cornell University and wrote in English, a language that was not his first, with a precision most native speakers couldn't match. He was known in literary circles. He was not known to the general public. He had been circling the idea at the center of Lolita for over a decade. In 1939, while still living in Paris and writing in Russian, he wrote a novella called The Enchanter, about a man sexually obsessed with a young girl. He was deeply unsatisfied with it, and for years afterward he considered the story unfinished, unresolved, something that needed to be attempted again, properly, in a different form. By the early 1950s, that unfinished idea had returned to him, insistent, and he began working on what would become Lolita. He wrote much of the novel in an unusual way, on index cards in pencil, often in the back seat of the family car during summer road trips out west. Nabokov was an obsessive amateur lepidopterist, a butterfly collector, and every summer he and his wife Vera would drive across the American West so he could hunt for rare species in the mountains. Vera drove. Nabokov sat in the passenger seat or in motel rooms in the evenings, filling out index card after index card with the sentences that would become one of the most stylistically dazzling novels in English. But as the manuscript grew, so did his anxiety about it. Nabokov understood clearly exactly what he was writing. A novel narrated by a pedophile, seductive in its prose, morally horrifying in its content, told from inside the mind of a monster who believed himself to be in love. He knew how easily it could be misread, misused, or simply destroy his reputation and his position at Cornell. He was, by nature, a private and somewhat formal man, deeply protective of his professional standing. At more than one point during the writing process, that fear won. Nabokov carried pages of the manuscript out to the incinerator behind their house, intending to burn them and abandon the project entirely. Vera Nabokov stopped him. She physically pulled pages back from the fire, and she insisted repeatedly that he finish the book. She would later be credited by scholars and biographers as functionally the reason the novel exists at all. Without her intervention in that backyard, on at least one, and by some accounts, two separate occasions, Lolita might end as ash instead of a manuscript. He finished the novel in 1953, and then came a different, quieter kind of struggle, finding someone willing to publish it. Nabokov sent the manuscript to 4 major American publishers. All 4 turned it down. Viking rejected it, Simon & Schuster rejected it, New Directions rejected it, Farrar Straus rejected it. Some editors admired the writing openly in the same letter in which they explained they couldn't possibly put their company's name on the book. The subject matter simply made it, in their view, unpublishable and legally dangerous in the United States in the 1950s. Nabokov was so uncertain about the book's reception that he seriously considered publishing it anonymously, without his name attached at all, to protect his teaching position and his family from scandal. It was Vera, again, who pushed back, insisting that if he was going to publish something this important, he needed to stand behind it with his own name. Eventually, through a French literary contact, the manuscript reached a Paris-based publisher called Olympia Press. Olympia had a strange split reputation, part serious avant-garde literary house, publishing writers who couldn't find homes elsewhere, and part deliberate publisher of pulpy erotica churned out under house pseudonyms to make money. Nabokov didn't fully realize at the time he agreed to the deal quite how the press was generally perceived. Lolita was published in Paris in September 1955, in English, in an unassuming 2-volume paperback edition with almost no fanfare. For months, almost nothing happened. The book sold modestly to English-speaking tourists and expatriates in Paris. It seemed for a while like it might simply disappear. Then, in December 1955, the British novelist Graham Greene, writing his annual list of the best books of the year for the Sunday Times in London, named Lolita one of the 3 best books of 1955. He didn't apologize for it or hedge. He simply said it was one of the best novels he'd read that year. That single mention set off an explosion. A rival columnist at another British paper, John Gordon of the Sunday Express, fired back almost immediately, calling Lolita in print sheer, unrestrained pornography and demanding to know how any serious critic could praise it. The public argument between the 2 papers ran for weeks. It was covered, mocked, and debated across British and then international press. The French government, under pressure, banned the book outright at the end of 1956, citing obscenity, an official ban that lasted roughly 2 years. Nabokov, watching all of this unfold from Ithaca, New York, where he continued quietly teaching his literature classes at Cornell, found himself at the center of an international controversy over a book that most people arguing about it had never actually read. American publishers, who only a few years earlier had rejected the manuscript outright, now found themselves reconsidering, cautiously, given the book's sudden and undeniable cultural relevance. In 1958, Putnam finally published Lolita in the United States, and this time it did not sell modestly. It became the first book since Gone with the Wind to sell over 100,000 copies within its first 3 weeks in print. It topped American bestseller lists for months. Nabokov, who had spent nearly 2 decades as a respected but financially modest academic writer, was suddenly, at 59 years old, wealthy and internationally famous off a manuscript he had twice tried to burn in his own backyard. Here's the detail that stays with you. The version of Lolita that changed literature, that's still read, taught, and argued about nearly 70 years later, only exists because at a critical moment, its author lost faith in it completely, and someone else didn't. Vera Nabokov didn't just support her husband's work in some general encouraging way. On at least one specific occasion, she made a direct physical choice, reaching into an actual fire that determined whether one of the most significant American novels of the 20th century would exist at all. Nabokov himself, later in life, when asked about the book's difficult path to publication, tended to downplay the drama of it in the understated, faintly ironic way he discussed most things about his own life and work. But Vera, in her own private notes and in conversations recorded by biographers, was less modest about what had happened. She knew precisely how close the book had come to never existing, because she was the one standing at the incinerator when it almost didn't. What does it mean that a novel now considered one of the great achievements of English-language literature nearly ended as ashes in a suburban backyard, saved not by its author's conviction, but someone else's? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this is the kind of story you want to keep hearing, the real story, the human story behind the books that changed everything, subscribe. There are more of these. There always are.